Hello, everyone. So I'm Phil Blades. I'm your host and the founder of Hire. So just a little quick note on Hire. So Hire is the world's largest TA community for in-house TA professionals with over 11,000 members worldwide. It's free to join. So if you're not a member, please mosey on down to hirehq.com and join up. We have in real life meetups across the US and Europe every month, as well as executive roundtables, these webinars that you hear today, and a Slack channel, of course, to ask advice. So in today's webinar, we're talking about setting up TA teams for success. So we're going to talk about all the different things to consider at different funding stages and some tips from all of our experiences. So joining me today, you can see that we have Jocelyn Lai, who is the Global Head of Talent from Duolingo, Louise Burgess, who is Director of Talent Acquisition at SoSafe, and Ben Payton, who is a Talent Director at Talentful, specializing in startups. Personally, my experience is very startup biased, having led TA for many different startups, many of whom have actually exited, but generally early on. So I'm as interested as you are to hear the experiences of the panel here. So onward. So could I ask our guests to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their experience? So maybe Jocelyn first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn Lai. I'm Global Head of Talent at Duolingo. We are an education company, so you probably know us for teaching languages. We are also working on math, so our goal is to teach anything and everything in the world and make it accessible. So I joined Duolingo 4.5 years ago. At the time, the company was about 100 people. It was private and headquartered in Pittsburgh. We are still headquartered in Pittsburgh, but we are now about 700 people, and we are a public company now. When I joined, there was also no TA team, so my remit was basically help build the team ground up, help us prepare for IPO.
Great. Louise?
Hi, I'm Louise. As Phil said, I'm the Director of TA and Employer Branding at SoSafe. My experience, so first of all, what SoSafe do, we're a cybersecurity awareness company. What does that mean? So many companies do security awareness training. We do it in a very fun, cool gamification way. My experience, I've been in 4 founder-run companies pre-IPO, a couple have exited, and I love it. So my experience has been scaling within teams and scaling TA teams.
Great.
That's me.
Ben?
Yeah, I'm Ben, work at Talentful. For those that don't know, Talentful is an embedded recruitment company. We land into ambitious growth companies and help them accelerate through a specific period of growth. Through the nature of that work, I've been fortunate enough to work at a fair few different companies from seed stage right through to exit, who have been prepping for funding rounds or for acquisitions, most notably Depop, who I worked with from Series A through to being acquired by Etsy, Tractable as they were scaling up for their Series B and Series C, and Gram Games, who were acquired by Zynga.
Brilliant. Excellent. Right, let's get into it then. So I think we're going to try and start chronologically here. So first of all, wanting to talk about what should companies or what should TA teams put in place for TA at the early stages. So let's probably start at seed stage and Series A. Maybe Louise, maybe you could give us some advice on this one.
Yeah, so I guess for me, it's a really good stage to put in those unbiased, repeatable, scalable processes. So structured interviewing, scorecards, hiring manager training, you know, all those good things like intake forms, kickoff meetings. So to make sure that your processes are really, really good and are also what's good for today will be good at scale. Really good job specs. I think also, you know, not just seeing them as adverts, but a way to like really put your voice out there in the world and linking that like your EVP as well. We've just done an EVP project here, which was completely new. So as simple as like, what is an EVP? You know, and we just did that, and we're doing a lot of work following that. So you will see all over our LinkedIn and other bits and pieces. But those 2 key things. So what is your EVP internally and externally, and also those baseline repeatable, scalable processes.
Great. Jocelyn, I know you have talent branding under your wing as well. Have any tips on that side from you?
Yeah, I totally agree with Louise. I would also say, so when I started TA at Duolingo, we were definitely beyond Series A, but it was similar of like there was no talent acquisition. And I would say one of the most important things is figuring out how you want to define what recruiting means, because it's very easy just to do the rinse and repeat and do the exact same thing that every other TA team is doing. For us, what we did here is we wanted to redefine how we do coordination. We wanted to make sure from the very get-go, hiring managers know that their scorecards should be in within 24 hours. So just setting those best practices, and also thinking about what you want to redefine. I think that's the easiest point, is when you don't have to deprogram what recruiting means, and that's actually your opportunity to define what you want recruiting to actually be.
Yeah. Ben, any thoughts from you? Maybe,
Yeah, I guess a lot of my experiences in the seed and Series A world, my first approach is always to educate founding teams on the importance of talent and talent acquisition. I think team quality at an early stage is probably one of the single best predictors of success that you can have. If you hire great people early on, everything else does become easier. And there are so many founders out there that you speak with that read endless blogs about product market fit and pitch decks and funding, but then they go into their first interview and they just like, I know what I'm doing, I'm just going to make it up as I go along. So I think it's really important to have an education piece early as a TA function with the team around you to say, this is how we want our best practice to be in talent acquisition. I think eventually a lot of people realize that compared to recruiting, fundraising can sometimes be relatively easy. They're both super competitive. They both take time, both take preparation. You have to sell well in both of them. And recruitment historically just doesn't get the attention it deserves from early stage companies. So my first thought every time I go in and speak with a seed or a Series A company is make sure we're actually all giving this the attention it deserves.
Yeah, it's one of the things I was actually thinking, that one of the most challenging things that I've experienced at that stage is trying to get, like, to build the whole company into a recruiting engine, to get everyone to really buy into the fact that everyone has responsibility for it, and it's not just recruiting's job, it's actually everyone's job. Has anyone ever experienced that, and maybe how do you overcome that early stage?
Yeah, and I think that recruiting isn't just a support function, but it's actually part of the business. And yes, recruiting is a team sport, but also for like the go-to-market teams to see their recruiting partner as part of their business. So to embed their sales recruiter in their QBRs, in their weekly meetings, all of that good stuff, to really see the recruiting team as an extension of their own team is super, super important. And that at that early stage, I think particularly founder-run businesses, if the rest of the business see the founders eye to eye with TA, that trickles down. If they see that respect for TA and how they hold it in high regard, I definitely think that trickles down. So building those relationships really early on is super important.
Yeah.
What we did at Duolingo is exactly what Louise said, is we actually had our CEO and CTO in almost every single interview for quite some time. And the reason is, when you're early stage, you actually don't have everything built yet. So you actually have to sell a dream. It's way more of an emotional sell. Whereas if you're later stage, it can be much more of a logical discussion. So the recruiters that you initially hire year one of building your TA team, they probably have to skew very high on being able to sell a dream that people don't see yet. And then you can add on to that with the founders who are probably quite well versed from their funding rounds in practice.
Yeah. Great point. Excellent. So maybe if your CEO or CTO don't somehow buy into the fact that recruiting is really important, like how can you go about convincing them that they need to be involved in the process?
One thing I did was I made a bet with our CEO. There was someone that it was a very difficult to get candidate, and they had never gone after tough to get candidates before. And Luis, our CEO, he actually did his own recruiting prior to me joining. And he said, I don't think you can close this person. I said, I'll bet you money that I can. And so we kind of made it fun. We gamified it. And that made it more of it just made it more of a game versus I'm here to show you what I can do. So we just built a little bit of banter into ours.
I like that. From my side, it's definitely aligning with the business mission. So I think talent strategy and business strategy should really be the same thing, and making sure that founding teams realize that from day one, and also involving them. So not just in interviews, but also in outreach. there are so many recruiters, particularly on LinkedIn, that just message candidates endlessly. But by having a CTO or a founder message candidates directly from their LinkedIn, showing interest, that instantly can spark a reaction. And the buzz that we all have when we hire a great candidate, founding team members have that same buzz as well, and taking them on that journey can be really impactful and powerful.
Yeah, and I would say the market right now is a little bit different, where there's actually opportunity for TA to have extra value, which is TA folks are talking to the market all day, every day. So it's PR, biz dev, and TA who actually know the symptoms of trends that are coming. And so the more we serve that up, the more value we have. So times have also changed, where I think the approach to selling in TA value in the past was probably a bit more basic, but now there's huge opportunity now.
Is there anything else that anyone would suggest on this stage as to what people should do? Maybe any practical takeaways for them?
I would say one thing that's differentiated really amazing recruiters at this stage versus the average are people who truly believe in the business. And I think that is so critical in early stages, because it ties back to, does this person believe in the dream and represent the dream externally?
I would agree with that. And also, just to echo Louise's point from earlier, just embed yourself as much as you possibly can. Be involved in all hands, be involved in the Monday morning stand-up with the tech team. There's probably only at this stage going to be 10 or 15 engineers. Just get to know them all on a personal level, get to know everyone you can in the business, and understand why they work for the business that they work for. And understanding that can then help you sell to candidates in the future.
Definitely.
Because I think you're hiring people at that stage who are very mission driven, who want to work for people with a mission. Like personally, that's why I work for these type of companies, but who want to, you know, work closely with founders, who want to really feel like they're helping founders live out this dream, and they find it very magical and very inspiring. So you need to hire, you know, recruiters who also, you know, feel like that and ascribe to that belief.
Right. Awesome. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about as we start to go through the gears. So, okay, you know, we've probably got product market fit by now. You know, the company is motoring, maybe they're about to raise or have raised a decent amount of funding now, and we know that most of that money is going to go into hiring people. So what are the things that we need to put in now when we're kind of maybe going through 100 people, 150 people, and really trying, you know, maybe doubling in size over 12 or 18 months time? Louise, maybe?
I think like a really good compensation philosophy, framework, leveling. What is our comp philosophy? You know, do we use Radford? Do we pay market rate plus, inflation rate plus? Establishing really good relationships with finance teams. Like, I think that partnership with FP&A and recruiting and TA leadership should be like, you know, lockstep. And that's what makes it really successful, because when you're hiring at that massive scale, when there's lots of moving pieces, that relationship, that really tight relationship is super important. Similarly, you know, knowing comp bands, having some kind of leveling structure in place is really, really important. So they're the two things that I think are super important, but love to hear what Jocelyn thinks.
Yeah, one thing that we had to face at this stage was, what kind of led company are we? Like, are we engineering led? Are we product led? Are we design led? And that really impacted how we shaped our staffing plans and how we went to market. Right. So we ended up deciding we are engineering led. We're founded by 2 engineers, but that changes the story that we have to candidates. And that also changes the type of engineers that we look for. We want engineers who also work well with product and design folks. And that actually helps with headcount now, because it's like, okay, we should always be about 50% engineering. And that then informs our pipelining strategies year over year. So that was a very valuable exercise we did.
What did that exercise look like? I'm just interested to know. You can ask the same thing. I've typically worked for sales-led companies, right? So yeah, I'd love to know what that exercise looked like.
Yeah, it was nothing formal. It was just all the executives and me in a room thinking like, what if we were engineering led? What would that look like? Do we want that to happen? What do we want the actual build of a product to be? Do we want it to be much more skewed towards technical ability, or do we want it to be more design? There was a point where we're like, maybe it is more design driven because our brand is quite fun and quirky. And we also went through another exercise, which I loved. And to this day, I kept the deck is we were about 100 people. And we said, what if we were 1,000 people? And it was not a formal exercise. It was just conversation about what that would look like. Would it mean we'd open up locations? Or would we only grow in Pittsburgh? Or maybe we should never grow to 1,000. Maybe that's what keeps us special. So I think having at early and mid stages, like, yes, everyone has a dream of what the company is, but we have to remember what is the dream beyond the dream that will get us to that. And it's important for all executives to buy into that as well.
I guess it's a really useful exercise because what gets you to 100 people does not get you to 1,000 people.
Yes.
And it suddenly becomes about scalability. It becomes about like radical prioritization and knowing exactly what you're hiring for and why, rather than just, you know, scrapping around.
Yeah, because we even got into like, okay, well, let's pretend that we opened 20 different offices. Why would we open them? Is it for the product, or is it for talent, or is it purely just to increase in size? Totally different motivations, totally different strategies.
Yeah. Makes sense. What about sort of how do you sort of train and develop teams at this point? Are there sort of new skills that your teams need to develop here? Any thoughts on
that? My perspective here is that it probably benefits the most to have a utility player at the beginning. So someone who can pivot from engineering to creative to product, because the company at this point is still trying to figure out what the roles are or what the ratios are. And if you hire an expert, you kind of silo them into only being able to drive a certain amount of impact and value. So that's what I people.
Yeah, I guess having people that can cross-functionally switch across from engineering to go-to-market from a recruitment standpoint is super useful at those early stages, as well as having people with the right mindset around data and analytics at this stage. I think this is when you can actually start to build some comprehensive data behind the scenes and accurately forecast around time to hire, time to fill, and then input that through to business strategy. So having people that, if people don't know that already, training people up on that at this stage is key.
And I really value the utility players as well. I think people that can flex, it's a really good thing to have on your team. But I think around that Series C, I'm a fan of kind of having a really strong like staff go-to-market recruiter, the same on the tech side as well. Because I think typically going back to like what got you to 100 people won't get you to 1,000 people. At that Series C, Series D point, you're also looking at like what your talent pool looks like, and often hiring some next level talent that generally requires, you know, some network, some, you know, recruiters bringing in their network, or some, you know, really strong sourcing skills or something like that. So my perspective is, you know, a baseline team of utility players, and then a couple of subject matter experts who can kind of build, who can bring a network. I think that's something I personally value. But at that later CD stage.
Yeah. What about things like, you know, setting up teams of like talent operations, sourcers, recruiters? Like, do we feel like this is the right kind of point to look at that? I know it's not like, you know, one size fits all, but, you know, you probably wouldn't have that early stage. Would you do it here, or would you do it later on typically?
Yeah, so I actually took the opposite approach of my past experience. My past experience was always like, okay, once you get to like 1,000, then you bring in the ops people because everything's a mess. So what I tried here at Duolingo was year 2, we brought in ops. And part of that is because I don't skew towards ops. So I knew that was a weakness of mine and I needed to plug it. But I knew we needed to go public. And I knew we wanted to scale headcount wise, even past our public size. So that's where I said, okay, well, then we have to scale with precision. We have to set it up correctly at the beginning, and we build the right habits. Otherwise, we're actually scaling a mess. And then you're suddenly left with like a huge TA ops team who's cleaning up, and that's not motivating at all.
Yeah, definitely. Any other thoughts?
It is around the Series B, C stage that I've seen sourcing teams come in. So they're a split between sources and recruiters. It works fine. I think there needs to be clarity on who's actually owning what. A lot of the times when it first starts, you see sources working, and then recruiters will be reaching out to the same pool of candidates, and then agencies will be messaging the same group of candidates as well. And you suddenly have one engineer, for example, that can be messaged by 3 people about one job. And it doesn't really do a lot for your brand recognition. So works perfectly well. Just make sure there's a process flow in place and people know what they own.
What sort of, you sort of touched on it a little bit there about sort of suppliers, and what do you think the sort of percentage we should be aiming for at this point in terms of sort of direct hiring from the in-house team versus, you know, maybe more specialist hiring coming from agencies or platforms or whatever it might be? Like, any rules of thumb or any ideas on that? Is that an answerable question? I don't know.
A lot of it depends.
I want to know, so I don't know. I'm not sure I know the answer.
I think a lot of it depends on the build of your team. If you have the staff recruiters and the specialists, then there's obviously less agency reliance there for those niche roles. And also depends on what your headcount is and what your bandwidth is of the team, I guess. But that's a very political answer.
For us at Duolingo, when we used headhunters and external agencies, it was for when we needed someone with credibility to go talk to a senior person. Because what we found is at the time, people actually thought we were some bot. They didn't think actual humans worked at Duolingo. So when a recruiter reached out to, like, let's say C-level executive, they'd be like, this must be spam. There are no people who work at Duolingo. But if it comes from a firm that they highly respect and know is legit and they're representing us, that was our kind of shortcut into the relationship. So that was our strategy.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So sort of C-level and VP or?
Yeah. So what we're using here is like for high volume. So we're hiring a lot of like junior level. We do a lot of promotions from within. So we've massive amount of SDR hiring, and we're using a platform. So like an external agency, and finding that super helpful. They're narrow and deep in like German SDR hiring, and I'm very happy to give that to them. So I think there's a place in the world for that. And so they probably percentage wise, they're doing a lot of our SDR, probably hopefully 80% of our SDR hiring, fingers crossed. But yeah, for those high volume where it makes sense, obviously not on a contingency basis, I think very much a place in the world.
I mean, when I worked in this phase, so I was at a company called Mind Candy. It's a gaming company, and we actually used to outsource some of the quite easy hiring, but because it was just so time consuming to just do the crowd control of getting people through the process, that it actually wasn't cost efficient to do ourselves. So yeah, it makes sense. I mean, German SDR hiring is probably actually really hard, I think, and a lot of crowd control, but also very niche as well. So,
but very time consuming and very niche. So if you can find a niche player, it's a lot easier for them to do it than my team. It would be a lot more time consuming. So exactly, very, very niche.
Yeah. And what about employer branding at this this sort of level? Like, what are there any sort of like tips on what we might do at this stage to get real visibility to do the scaling?
So I've actually full on hired an employer branding person at this stage, and we're putting a lot of effort behind it. So we're doing probably 2 events per month. We're doing the big stuff like Web Summit. We're doing smaller local events, college career fairs. We're doing a lot. So typically previous places I've been, we didn't have employer branding at all. We didn't have anyone, or it came later stage. But personally, I'm trying it out. I can come later on and tell you how it's going, but we have a pretty good plan for the rest of the year. And it's got definitely, even in the 2 months I've been here and the few things we've measured, the awareness has gone up. The amount of inbound applications has gone up for sure. So we can only say it's something to do with brand awareness, talent attraction. But yeah, that's just my perspective on it.
Right.
Yeah, I think the employer branding space has actually changed quite a bit given the market changed. I think before is more focused on awareness. So for us, it was people knew us as a product, but not as an employer. So that was the gap we had to fill. And it was actually a very easy approach of just mass approach of reach as many people as you can. But now that it's harder to get candidates, I think we have to have very specific and motivating EVPs, even in stage of a company. So that's kind of a shift that I've started to notice, and it's also shifted how we've approached EB here.
Right.
Yeah, and just a note on that at the earlier stage, so Series A, Series B, I'd expect normally to see like a social media schedule if people don't already have one. I'd expect to see like an event strategy and meetup strategy, ideally partnerships with a few meetups that are going to target relevant communities. And then when you scale and start to grow, you can just fund those more. But I would expect at Series C to have like someone owning employer brand, whether that be in marketing or TA.
Yeah, makes sense. So we've had a question from Ali. What have people over-engineered when scaling businesses, and what red herrings should people look out for? Anything we've over-egged?
I would say over-engineering headcount planning. Because one, the market continues to change. So headcount planning is an output of the market. And two, the company even after IPO, the company's still trying to figure itself out, right? We're still building new products, and that affects our staffing plans. Funding rounds are totally going to change your headcount plans. So I would say that was the hardest part for me joining Duolingo early on. I was like, we don't have a headcount plan. We're just going to hire as many people as possible. What? And I had to roll with it. And that was the most anxiety-driven part. And I had to make sure I didn't over-engineer it, or else it was a wasted effort.
Yeah.
I think from my side, there's a common thing that you hear, which is the person we're trying to hire is a unicorn. And I think people get it in their head that they want to hire a specific person. And there's so much media out there about the importance of a bad hire and the negative effect that can have on your business that people get really petrified of hiring anyone for a role because they're looking for something that doesn't exist. And you can have, like, I've seen companies with a matrix about a matrix to try and get the right person there. But all you can do is be really aligned on what competencies you're trying to hire and hold the team accountable to those competencies throughout the interview process, and saying, this is realistic that we can hire. This is how we're going to interview these people. If they tick all the boxes, we are going to make them an offer. And don't let people be scared because they don't feel a spark or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think my perspective is there's two things here. One is like interview types, right? Oh, we should be doing this company are doing a bar raiser interview. We should be doing this because so over engineering on when you're trying to do a structured interview process, over engineering that structured interview process. And then tooling. Okay, so especially in these times, I know I'm getting reached out to like 10 times a day. There's just a lot out there. But okay, do we really need this coordination tool, or do we really need this XYZ tool, or can we do it in-house? Does it just look pretty? So that's what I think. Your toolkit.
Yeah, cool. And then moving on to finally, company's gone amazingly well. We're gearing up for IPO or some kind of exit at a later stage. This is not something I have loads of experience of, as I said before, but what are the kind of key tips here? So say messages are coming down from the board, right? We're going to go for IPO in the next, let's say 2 years or 18 months or something like that. What do you need to get in place before we're going to be ready for that from a TA perspective?
I think there's some basics of like ATS, making sure your interview plans and your interview questions and feedback are quite clean. There's processes documented. Generally, there's strong compliance. What we found at Duolingo, that was helpful was there was earlier this sentiment of like, oh, because we're going public, we now have to be 1000% compliant and it's going to change who we are as a company. We're not going to be fun anymore. And so what we had to do a lot of messaging around is, hey, IPO is actually just one point in our entire company's legacy. It is not the ultimate pinnacle. So there was a ton of messaging from executives that helped with this. It's like, oh, okay, we just need to get more compliant. It's not like, because we have to be compliant, we're going to lose everything. And so we actually haven't seen our company culture impacted too much from going public, which we're very, very proud about, because we've been intentional about, like, that was just a moment. We don't even celebrate the anniversary of our IPO because it was just one moment.
Yeah.
I would say compensation, your frameworks, when you do refresh grants, what those look like, all of those kind of, I would say, housekeeping bits and pieces.
Yeah. The equity piece we did a ton of work on, and it was the messiest possible. We switched from options to RSUs and then to economic value. It was a ton. So being prepared for that earlier on, that's probably one thing I wish we had done better.
What are the things that that you get requests on going through, or coming up to an IPO process? So what are the particular reports or documents that need to be prepared by TA? What are just if people are kind of coming towards that period or feel like the company's coming towards it, what do they need to prepare for?
On my end, I didn't experience too much of documentation from the TA side. We focused more on the business side of putting together like our S1 document of what we are as a business, how we're going to prove to be profitable. But it did mean that the moment we announced that we are public, the expectations from candidates changed, right? They're suddenly no longer wanting the dream. They want to talk more about the money because they're like, you all are now filthy rich. Why aren't you offering me $1 billion? So we had to rapidly change our sales pitch and what we were talking to candidates about, because their values changed and the type of candidates we attracted was suddenly different.
Those mission-driven candidates, right? Like they're not looking at you the same right now.
Right. I mean, there's some candidates who are like, well, now that you're public, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And out of curiosity, did the approval process change? So like for job sign off and for offering candidates, did you have to go through different loops to get sign off for those?
We decided not to, because from the very beginning, we always had an approval process because we knew going public was one of the goals. But what we've had to really tighten up more is making sure every headcount finance is aware. Before, we didn't even have a CFO. We just hired as many people as we wanted because we had a ton of money in the bank. Now we can't do that. So that's probably the biggest change.
Right. Any thoughts on that? Sounds like some good preparation. Brilliant. Okay. Anything else do you think that we haven't gone through that do you think people might need to know about going through these funding round stages?
I guess just from what Jocelyn just said, have your end goal in sight. The fact that you knew all along that you wanted to go public probably helped shape the way that you grew the TA organization, and like having things like role approval, sign off, all ready to go meant that it was a seamless process rather than having to change all of your processes at the last minute.
Yeah. And this isn't specific, but know your gap. Like Jocelyn said, like ops for her, same for me. Like I love data and I love reporting, but it's just not my thing, right? I know I need it. So I've implemented GEM and, hired someone to do that, but I've done it at an early stage. So I think that's something to be super aware of, is what you need and what your gap is.
Yeah. Great.
And I'll share one thing that was so surprising to me, but looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness, that was like a DA factor as we scaled, is communication becomes harder and harder. And training your teams to be able to think and communicate cross-functionally within the team, but also into the business and across different functions with finance. That is a really important muscle to start exercising earlier on, because the more people there are, the more complexity, the more things are lost in translation.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Thank you everyone for coming and watching the webinar, and thank you to my guests as well. Some really great insight. I definitely learned a lot here. I hope everyone else did as well. As I mentioned at the start of the program, this is a Hire webinar, so please come and join Hire if you haven't already. It's at hirehq.com, and then we'll let you into our Slack, and then you'll get all these webinars and in real life events and all that kind of stuff sent directly to you. So yeah, thanks very much everyone, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. Thanks.
Thanks.